The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
A very good evening to one and all. Today is the session on various penalties under the law and mitigation measures. I welcome you all on behalf of Hirgange Academy to this webinar. And as you all know, our today's speaker is CA Gagan Kedia. So I will introduce him to the audience and then I will hand over the proceedings to him to begin the session. CA Gagan Kedia is a tax analyst, management consultant, and corporate trainer, offering over 8 years of experience in the field of indirect tax consultancy, litigation management, and due diligence support. He has worked with Deloitte Haskins and Sells, catering to tax advisory and litigation needs of global retail conglomerates and IT giants. He is passionate about his profession and has been very active member of the training teams in Deloitte at a pan-India level. He has also conducted various trainings with big corporate houses in the area of taxation and accounting. He is a co-opted member of the IDTC of EIRC of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India for the year 1718 and 1819. He is a core member of the GST Study Group Kolkata under Indirect Tax Committee of ICAI, dealing in GST research, representations to governments, publication of books, etc. He is inducted as a faculty under the IDTC of ICAI for GST trainings in the certificate course being organized by the Institute. He is a visiting faculty for GST trainings with central and state GST officers, MSME Technology Development Center Agra, professional associations, and public and private sector undertakings as corporate trainer. He is the managing partner of the firm MRG Kedia & Co. and is looking after advisory and litigations in the field of indirect taxes. Now, I would request Gagan to take over and start the session.
Thank you, Shilpi-ji. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello. Am I audible? Can I get a confirmation?
Yes, Gagan, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shilpi-ji, for the introduction. I will straight away start with the topic that has been given to me, that is offenses and penalties under GST Act. Uh, but to begin with this topic, we need to understand why do we need a penal provision in any tax statute. The first point that we need to understand is, rather not understand, rather acknowledge, is that GST is primarily a self-assessment based tax. That means the government has given that first liberty to the taxpayers, that you should yourself assess your tax, comply with the law, and then follow all the provisions. Now, because it is a self-assessment board taxation system, having a penal provision is a mandatory requirement to keep a check on the taxpayers. So we need to understand that the purpose of penal provisions is to regulate the tax offenders, and it is not to harass the taxpayers. That is the primary intent. Now, one thing that I will like to share, when we are studying the penalty and offenses provisions, is that you should acknowledge that taxation, especially GST, we can call it is a mixture of science and arts. Yes, we have all studied commerce, but yes, I would say taxation is a mixture of science and arts. Science because in the first part of the provision, the statute, you will see there are certain specific formulas, certain specific ifs and buts, certain conditions based on which law follows. There is a thumb rule for certain items. So that is the science part of it. The place of supply, the time of supply. I have to turn off my webcam because I'm probably facing bandwidth issues. Yes. So why I call it an art is because when we move on to the second stage of the GST law, that is the post compliance, the assessment stage, here comes the art portion, wherein it is depending on the art of the reader, art of the officer, how to interpret the provisions and how to present the provisions of the law when it comes to penalties and offenses. Because what may look 6 to me may look 9 to the other person. So this is an art how you present it. So I would start my presentation with the topics that we will be discussing. First, we will look at what is an offense, because if there is no offense, there is no penalty for it. Then we'll look at various penalties, and we'll also discuss on the safeguarding measures or the defense measures that probably which we can use. Again, I will say, like I told, this portion that we are discussing today is an art rather than science. So you will not find any specific thumb rule as a defense. First, we have to see what is an offense. The word offense has not been defined in the GST Act, so we have to borrow the definition from General Clauses Act. Offense means any act or omission made punishable by law for the time in force. That means whenever any action is done or any action which is required to be done is not done, both ways it will go. Any act which is punishable by law or any omission to do something which is also punishable by law. For instance, taking registration, if you omit, if you do not take registration, that is an omission to do an act. Both are falling under the category of offense. Now you have to commit that act or the omission which is punishable by law. If it is not punishable, even that act will not be considered as an offense. That is the first nature of the term offense. One more thing on the term offense that we need to understand is mere intention of committing offense is not sufficient. You should also actually have the action or the inaction along with the intention. Both has to be together. Sometimes there can be a situation that there is no intention to commit an offense, but it is still an offense. That means it is not a deliberate offense. It may be an negligence, which is also termed as an offense. Now we will look at a short story, rather an example, to understand more clearly what is an offense. That is, what is a act of doing wrong and what is an act of not doing what is correct. So as we would see in this lockdown period, we are experiencing the two of the most great epics of our time, Mahabharata and Ramayana, and it is said that Mahabharata has answers to all the questions that a human being can have. So we will take you from Mahabharata and try to put in our practice. Let us go to the scene in the courtroom of Dhritarashtra when Draupadi was being disrobed by Duryodhan and his brother Dusashan. The act of disrobing Draupadi by Duryodhan and Dusashan was an act of doing a wrong thing. This is a direct action of doing something wrong. Now, let us look at an example where a person omitted to do something which was required to be done, which is also classified as an offense. So we will take the clue from Bhishma Pitama, who was the grandfather of all Kauravas and Pandavas. He was the supreme authority at that time. He was present in the courtroom. Had he wanted, he could have stopped all that nuisance, but he chose to keep quiet because of his personal reasons. Even his inaction was considered as an offense and he was punished for his offense. Now, taking this cue in our practice, we have to take up, we have to prepare our minds, we have to prepare our businesses that merely if you do something wrong, only then it will be an offense is not true. If you don't follow certain guidelines, even that may tantamount to be an offense and it may lead to penalty. Now we will look at certain general discipline with respect to penalty. Section 122 of the CGST Act contains various situations of offenses which will lead to a penalty. We will discuss it in details in the subsequent slides. There are three various subsections in section 122 which covers different provisions. Section 122 bracket 1, which has around 21 areas or offenses which has penalty prescribed. It starts with the word any taxable person. That means a penalty under section 122 subsection 1 or an offense can be committed by any taxable person. Now this is a very wide definition, wide scope, because taxable person as per the definition means a person who is registered or who is liable to be registered. Now, who is a person liable to be registered? Who is fulfilling the requirements of section 22 or section 24 of the Act. Let's say if you are liable to be registered, but you have not taken registration till now, and you are feeling that I have not taken registration, I don't have a GST number, how can someone impose penalty on me? Then you are wrong, because we know inaction to do something is also an offense, and that is also covered in the scope of the offense section, penalty section 122(1). The other basic thing that we need to understand that whether a malified intent, guilty mind, a mens rea, is it mandatory to impose a penalty? Whether it has to be a willful, deliberate act of an offense to quantify for a penalty, then the answer is no. It may be a deliberate act, it may be a negligent act. We have to understand the difference between deliberate fraud and negligence. Penalty can be imposed for both the situations. However, the quantum of penalty and the instance of penalty may differ in both these cases. We have to also understand over here, which we will also discuss in the subsequent slides, the difference between section 73 and 74. To just have an overview, these two sections deals with notices which has to be issued to recover the taxes, interest, as well as applicable penalty. So if any offense is committed under section 122, the recovery of that amount can happen through can be initiated through section 73 or 74. 74 talks about where you have frauded the government, or you have willfully misstated, or you have suppressed the facts to evade tax. Then section 74 is applicable, and we know extended period is also invoked. However, in case there is no fraud, willful misstatement, or suppression of fact to evade tax, then 74 is not applicable. He has to issue a notice under 73, and it has certain limitations of time as well as penalty. So mala-fide intent is must for 74, not must for 73. Penalty can be imposed in both these situations. We will discuss all these in details in the subsequent slides. We also need to understand whether it is the liability of the assessee or the officer to prove that who is having a mala fide intent. To understand, we have to read section 135 of CGST Act, which says in case of prosecution, criminal offense, it is preconceived, pre-assumed that the assessee is in default, the assessee has committed the crime, and it is the duty of the assessee to prove otherwise. Let's take a very simple example. Let's say I'm driving and suddenly a bike came in front of my car. He was coming in the wrong direction, and he just came in front of my car, and we met with an accident. He fell down, he probably got very seriously injured. Now in the court, it will be preconceived that I have caused the accident because of this criminal nature. I have to prove otherwise, that it was not my fault. He was traveling in another direction, he was helmetless, and whatever be the facts, it is my duty to prove. It is pre-assumed that I am guilty. However, in case of general penalty under 122, the offenses under 122, which are mostly civil in nature, I would not say totally, but mostly civil in nature, in that case it is not preconceived that there is a case of fraud involved. Why? Because it can lead to both notices under 73, which is non-fraud cases, as well as notices under 74, which is fraud case. Therefore the assessing officer needs to exercise his mind, and he needs to substantiate why he feels there is a case of fraud, willful misstatement, or suppression of facts. Merely these three is not sufficient. It has to be followed by an intent to evade tax. That is to be first explained by the officer. We will see in the ensuing slides that this explanation between 73 and 74 is a major difference for the penalty. Now we will look at section 126. What is this section 126? First, we will discuss that what is the escape route, if any, in case of penal exposure in GST. So law also understand that we have created a draconian law. I will not say draconian, probably a bit lengthy and detailed. It needs a regular follow-up. People may miss on small things, and for all those small things, if I continue charging penalty, people would have to shut down their businesses, and they will not be able to comply with the entire requirements of GST law. So they came out with one section 126, and it is very interesting. We have to read in detail. It starts with the officer will not impose penalty for minor breaches. So it starts with the officer shall not impose any penalty for minor breaches. That means from the starting line we can understand that the action is to be taken on the part of the officer, that officer shall not impose penalty. For what? For minor breaches. What is the minor breaches? It says minor breaches of tax regulation or procedural requirements. What is minor breach of tax regulation? The law says where the tax involved is less than 5,000 rupees, it is a minor breach of tax regulation. Now, what is minor breach of procedural requirements? It says procedural requirements specifically like any mistake or omission in the documentation or any procedural requirement which can be easily rectifiable and it is made without fraudulent intent or gross negligence. So if any mistake which is apparent from record, if it is subsequently rectified, or it can be proved that it can be rectified and it is a minor procedural flaw, the assessee can invoke section 126 and ask the officer not to charge penalty on that offense. We need to also understand section 126 subsection 5, which says if the error is, let's say there is an error of any tax avoidance, tax evasion, small amount 5,000 rupees. If let's say it is voluntarily disclosed by the assessee, the officer may consider it while determining the penalty. That means even in case of voluntary disclosure, it is at the discretion of the officer whether he will impose penalty or not. That means whether relief of section 126 is to be given or not is at the discretion of the officer. Now let us look at an example of procedural minor breach of procedural requirement, specifically like documentation. Let's say a person has exported goods without payment of tax. So on the document itself, he has to mention export of goods without payment of tax on furnishing of LUT. Let's say he has not mentioned that in the tax invoice. However, this omission in the documentation is very apparent from record, can be easily rectifiable with the shipping bill that he has filed, and that omission of mentioning that line does not have any fraudulent intent because he will not gain anything out of it. This can be considered as a procedural breach, nominal procedural breach, and any penalty in this regard should not be charged. That a plea has to be taken by the assessee. Now we move on to the penal provisions, penalty offenses, various offenses. This section 122 has 3 subparts, 1, 2 and 3 subsections. These 3 deals with 3 different provisions. The first one deals, it has 21 subclauses. We'll discuss all of it and how to save one from those provisions. We will look at it, and then we will look at the other 2 provisions, which also brings within its ambit persons who are not directly involved in the business. We will look into it. Section 122 bracket 1. We will divide this 21 clauses into these 5 basic heads. That means offenses are either classifiable as supply related offenses or payment tax related offenses, ITC related offenses, procedural offenses, and offenses which has third party exposure. Supply related offense, this is the classic, most commonly occurring offense and the most draconian offense in the entire law, which talks about where a person is supplying goods or services without issuing any invoice. It talks about cases where person supplies goods or services without issuing any invoice. And the subclause 2 talks about the reverse way, you are issuing invoice but you are not supplying goods. The first one deals with cases we are selling outside the books. The second one talks about bogus bills, fictitious bills which you issue for your own vested interest. That may either be inflation of turnover for banking purposes, for any investment purposes, anything. But There can be other intentions behind it. We will not go into those intentions. We'll go into the repercussions of it. So if there is any supply of goods without a tax invoice or an incorrect or false invoice, that will attract a penalty. All the penalty is same. It is 10,000 rupees or the amount of tax involved, whichever is higher. This penalty is for CGST, similar penalty for SGST, totally making to 20,000 minimum. Or rather, if the tax amount is more, it will be more. So we will consider one example of issuing invoice without supply of goods. Let's say what is happening, you are selling product A. Okay, you are a trading firm, you are purchasing a product and you are selling. You are making an invoice of product A. However, the item that you are supplying is product B. It happens. It happens a lot of places where people purchase potato and supply gold out of it. That has been very widely used in our nation, that you purchase aloo and make sona out of it. People do it. If you track the HSN, they are purchasing something and they're selling some other item in a trading organization. So if you issue a bill of another item and you supply another item, then are you committing any offense? The answer is yes. Are you committing one offense or are you committing two offense? The answer is you are committing two offenses. One, for product A, for which you have issued the invoice, you will be attracted by 122 bracket 2, which says you have issued the invoice for item A, but you have not supplied item A. And for the item B, which you have actually supplied, 122 bracket 1 will be affected, which says you have supplied goods, that is item B, but you have not issued the invoice for item B. This is the allegation by the officer. So we have to be very careful about the HSN of the product that we are using, because if the HSN is wrongly mentioned, if the description is wrongly mentioned in the invoice and the actual product is something else, and in case the vehicle is intercepted, it will be liable for confiscation straight away. We need to check on this part, on the internal control of the organization. I'm not going into the prosecution part. If we go into the prosecution part, these two provisions, if the amount of tax evaded crosses a certain amount, you have to straight away go to jail. That will be taken care separately. I'm not going to prosecution as of now. Now we will look at the tax related offenses that we can cause. I'm sorry. Yes. So if you collect any amount of tax, but you fail to pay the same to the central government, that means you have collected any amount as tax, but you have not paid to the government, as in you have not filed your GST 3B and you have not paid the tax. What is the duration? Beyond a period of 3 months from the date on which such payment becomes due. From the due date of 3B, if you have not filed your return for 3 months, section 122 bracket 3 gets attracted. You are liable for a penalty, because it is government's money that you are keeping with yourself and you are not remitting the same to the government. For example, very simple, there is a tendency to file the returns very late. I have many clients which are, they're like, we don't have funds now, we cannot pay, we have certain other issues. This provision will get attracted and the penalty is 10,000 or tax involved, whichever is higher. You can imagine the amount of penalty that can be levied for this offense. We'll discuss certain more aspects, but first look at 122 bracket 4, which talks about if you collect any tax in contravention of the provisions of the act and then you fail to pay to the government. For example, you charged a person 18% GST on a transaction, which actually should be 12%. So when you are filing the return, you realize, "Arey, ispe to 12% hona hai," and you said, "I will pay government 12% only." This is not allowed. First, if you collect any tax outside the provisions of the act, you have to straight away pay that tax to the government. Okay. Now what is collection of tax? If I merely charge it in my invoice, it is simply mentioned in my invoice. I have charged it in my invoice. I have not collected the money as of now. Will it tantamount to collection of taxes? For the answer, we need to read section 49 bracket 9. It talks about it will be deemed that the incidence of duty is passed on to the buyer in case of supply of goods or services. So 49.9 makes a deeming fiction and creates a scenario that even though I may not have passed on the incidence, I may have sold at a gross rate, but it will be deemed that the tax liability has been passed on to the buyer. So I have issued an invoice, I have charged GST in it, and I have given the goods and the invoice to the buyer. He has still not paid me. Will section 122, 3 or 4 in this case be attracted? The answer is no, because collection of tax has to be in physical form. Mere levy of tax in an invoice does not tantamount to collection of tax. Collection of tax happens only when the tax is physically collected in the form of money or otherwise from the buyer. This we need to keep in mind whenever any let's say, very simple example, if there is a allegation of filing of 3B delayed, let's say for very simple example, a CA, he's filing his 3B very at a delay of 3 months, 122 bracket 3 gets attracted. However, if he has not collected the tax amount, this provision can be fought with. These are the things that you need to take care in your books of accounts. The other two provisions, 122.5 and 6, talks about if you fail to comply with the TDS and TCS provisions with respect to deduction and collection of tax. You were supposed to deduct a TDS, but you did not deduct TDS, or you deducted a short TDS of GST, or in case of TCS, you have failed to collect or you have short collected the TCS amount. Still, this provision will be attracted and you will be liable for the penalty. Now we will look at ITC related exposures, and we have to be very careful on this. Till now, if you would remember, we had discussed in the first provision, first slide of this penalty offenses, that if I issue an invoice without supplying goods, that is an act of offense. That means this offense, what we had discussed earlier, was from the point of view of the supplier. Now this provision 122 bracket 7 talks about if you take or utilize ITC. Please note the word take. Even a wrong availment of ITC, and utilization is always there. If you wrongly utilize ITC, okay, but even if you wrongly take an ITC without actual receipt of goods and services, then the penal provisions are attracted. Please note that the penal provision in case of ITC is attracted only if you take or utilize ITC for those items where you have not received the goods and services. That means if you take ITC of the bogus bills, then this provision is attracted. In no other case for ITC, for taking ITC, the provisions of section 122 bracket 1 can be invoked. Now we have to think on one point. We will slightly deviate from this penal provisions and go to the interest provisions. Example, I was supposed to take credit of 10 lakhs and I have wrongly taken the credit by adding one more zero of 1 crore rupees. My credit ledger is having that extra 90 lakhs still. It is there in my credit ledger. After 2 months, when I realized this mistake, I realized that that 90 lakh is still lying there in my accounts, and I immediately reversed those ITC. Question over here is whether that wrong availment of 90 lakhs, which was subsequently reversed after 2 months. So tax has been paid to the government. That wrongly availed ITC, yes, Gagan, 90 lakh has been reversed. It has been paid. Good. What happens to the interest as well as penalty? Let us look at section 73 or section 74, which talks about this case. It says, in case you have wrongly availed or wrongly utilized an input tax credit, then interest as per section 50 and applicable penalty shall be paid. Now we have to understand, have we wrongly availed or wrongly utilized? The answer is we have wrongly availed 90 lakhs because it was still there in my credit ledger. I have not utilized it. So I have reversed 90 lakh. Question again comes whether I'm liable to pay interest. 73 says yes, you have to pay interest. Even if you had no fraudulent intent, you have to pay interest, but as per section 50. Now when we come to section 50, I find nowhere it is mentioned in the act that for wrong availment of ITC, you are required to pay interest. Let me read section 50 for your ready reference. It says every person who is liable to pay tax in accordance with the provisions of this act, but fails to pay the tax. That means if you are liable to pay tax in accordance with the provision, but you fail to pay the tax within the provisions of the law. So if you wrongly utilize, then this provision is attracted. That you have paid the tax by wrong utilization, by not following the provisions. But if you have merely wrongly taken, wrongly availed, but you have not utilized it, then the provision, the basic provision of section 50 is not attracted and interest is not applicable on the same. You have a very strong reason to fight on it. However, penal exposure would still be there on you because it is clearly mentioned that if you take or utilize ITC without actual receipt of goods or services, then you are liable to penal provisions. We will look at the defense mechanism, defense techniques at the end of the slides. If there is still a possibility in this case, we have to also read the section 73 and the mischief given in section 73(11) for this point. The next point that we will be discussing is 122(1)(8). If a person fraudulently obtains refund of tax under this act. Let me give you an example. Let's say Mr. A has purchased some capital goods, some raw materials, some services, and he has manufactured product X and exported the same without payment of tax. Now, when he's filing refund of ITC on export without payment, we all know that the calculation requires us to exclude capital goods from the definition of net ITC, which can be refunded. However, the assessee has not reduced capital goods from the calculation. He has applied for the full amount and he has also obtained that refund. Maybe the officer himself has not checked, or probably is hand in hand with the assessee, and he has got the refund. He's saying the officer is allowing, I have got the refund. Okay, you have obtained the refund, but you have willingly done this even though you know the provisions. Whenever there is an inquiry, investigation, audit whatsoever on this matter, you please remember you have to pay interest as well as penalty on this fraudulently obtained refund amount. Therefore, as a best business practice and to mitigate such type of errors, we have to keep our books of accounts in such a manner that, let's say for this refund, your books of accounts is clearly indicating, differentiating between inputs, capital goods and input services. And whenever you are filing the application for refund, it is properly supported by the details and it is cross-checked that there is no instance of wrong, fraudulently obtained refund. It has to be a best business practices which you have to follow. Again, if you take or distribute input tax credit, or as an ISD input service distributor, you have wrongly taken or distributed ITC, again, like the previous subclause 7, you would be liable to a penalty. Now let me ask you a question, Gagan. What if penalty is applicable if I take ITC which is not reflected in my GSTR 2A. I have taken an ITC that is not there in my 2A. For example, at present, excess amount of 10% can be claimed in my 3B. However, I have ignored that and I have claimed the entire amount of input tax credit as per my books, which is more than whatever is coming in 2A, as well as the incremental 10%. Is there a penalty for that under 122 bracket 1, which we are discussing? Kagan, till now, point number 9, till point number 9, we have not seen a case which matches this. We will look at it in the ensuing slides. Please remember, if there is no penal section, he has to go to a general penal provision, which we will see, and that is very limited amount. Let us look at the procedure related penal exposures. If a person falsifies or substitutes financial records, or he produces false information with an intent to evade tax, then you have committed an offense. That means you have substituted financial records, income tax return you have given some other data, ROC you have given some other data, but for GST you have prepared and given some other data. That if it leads to evasion of tax, again you would be attracting a offense. It may happen that the documents which is submitted by the junior accounts team may somewhere be changed to suit the requirements of GST. This action of the junior accounts team, if without the information of the senior management, would still attract this penal exposure, and it is therefore suggested that whatever information is submitted to the officer needs to be first cross-checked with respect to all the angles of penal exposure as well as compliance level. Only then it needs to be submitted to the officer. Let's say if a person was required to take registration but he has not taken registration, or let's say if he was required to give some information in the registration details but he has given some wrong information, then again penal exposure is there. He is liable for penalty. For example, let's say if a person has 5 places of business and in the online details he has mentioned only 4 of them. 1 place of business is not given in the GST portal. This can be tantamounted as you have given wrong information or false information with respect to your registration details, and penalty can be created because of it. Let us take an example. Let us say the 5th premises which was not mentioned did a business of, let's say, 10 crores having an ITC of 1 crore 80 lakh, but I have not uploaded that place of business as an additional place of business in my registration details. Now the officer comes and tell me this additional place is not mentioned in your GST particulars. We will invoke section 122. We will consider it as an offense, and you are not eligible for any of the ITC of 1 crore 80 lakh that is pertaining to that particular place of business. Now, how far that allegation of the officer is correct needs to be examined. That if I fail to take registration, that is not our case. If I give false information, yes, that is my case. Now we have to look what is the penal exposure, what is the penalty amount. It says 10,000 rupees or tax evaded or wrongly claimed, credit wrongly claimed in this case, whichever is higher. My question now is, in case the additional place is not given in your registration particulars, is that one of the conditions to claim credit as per section 16? The answer is no. That is a procedural lapse. We have to request the officer for section 126. In this case, the tax involved wrongly claimed is 0. 10,000 is the general fixed penalty, whichever is higher is 10,000, Maximum he can impose a penalty of 10 plus 10, 20,000, and not the 1 crore 80 lakh as ITC can be questioned. This has to be substantiated that that was an additional place and it was an negligent act, not a deliberate act to not give those details. This is just an example. I would again reiterate my initial sentence that understanding the assessment procedure, penal procedure in GST, it is an art rather than science. The other provision, if you obstruct or prevent officer to conduct his duty, he can again impose penalty on you. That means if he finds that you are not cooperating with him, if you're not allowing him to enter your premises, if you're not allowing him to have a look at the documents, access to the documents in case he asks for, and you're not allowing him to complete the assessment, he has the power to invoke this provision and he can impose the penalty on you. Again, the question is, if you have not given him the information, he cannot quantify the amount, how much the penalty he can charge? That is a question. Whether he will do a best judgment or whether he will do a regular assessment is another question. Now, penalty under 122 bracket 14 says, if you transport good without the cover of documents, that means an e-way bill or a tax invoice or a delivery challan or a bill of supply, as the case may be, you will be liable for penalty. We also see that this offense may also lead to confiscation of our goods and seizure of our goods. It also invokes a penalty, which is again 10,000 or tax amount. The other provision procedure related issues are, if you suppress your turnover, which leads to evasion of tax, only then it is an offense, otherwise not. And if you fail to maintain or keep records of your books of accounts, this is a very serious offense. Probably 90% of the assessees would attract it, that if you fail to maintain or keep your records or documents as per the requirement, you can be exposed to a penalty. Now the amount is 10,000 or tax involved, whichever is higher. Non-maintenance of books probably will not give you a tax figure, so 10,000 is the amount which can be levied. The other offenses is, if you supply, transport or store any goods which the person has reason to believe are liable to confiscation, that means you are helping the offender, you are abating in the offense, then as a third person you are exposed to penalty. If you issue invoices using other person's GST number, which is very easily available in the signboard of every person, that is an again offense. If you tamper or destroy any evidence, or if you dispose any detained goods without proper permission, then you are liable to a penalty. It will be deemed that you have committed an offense. The penalty is same for all these 21 points, that is 10,000 rupees or the amount of tax involved, whichever is higher. We have to understand that this penalty is applicable on any taxable person, whether registered or unregistered. Now, after reading these 21 points, let us again revisit and think that if I take ITC of an amount which is not reflected in 2A, will it attract any penalty? I have availed ITC which is not in accordance with the provision of Rule 36(4). Will it attract penalty under 122(1)? The answer is no. For that, we have to come to 122(2), and then we will see why two provisions were required. 122(2) says it is applicable to registered persons where tax is not paid, or tax is short paid, or erroneously refunded, or ITC is wrongly availed or wrongly utilized as per the provisions of the Act or the rules. Is it not sounding similar to section 73 and 74? Yes. We need to understand section 122 is a levy section to invoke penalty, and 73 and 74 are the operational sections to collect that penalty amount. You have to first invoke this penalty and then collect through 73 or 74 by issuing a notice. It says if you have reasons of fraud, then the amount of penalty is 10,000 rupees or 100% of tax. And if it is for other than fraud reasons, then the penalty is limited to 10% of the tax. Now in this case, if you would see at this point, ITC wrongly availed as per the act or rules. So any amount of 2A which is not there in my GSTR 2, sorry, any amount of ITC not reflected in my 2A is an ITC wrongly availed, thereby attracting section 122(2), and we need to see whether it is for fraud or other than fraud. Let's say even if fraud is not there, you are still exposed to penalty of 10,000 rupees or 10% of your ITC, which is a big amount. Now let us look at 122(3). Let's say if I am not the person who has committed that offense. Let's say, for example, I am the beneficial owner of a transaction, but the person, legal person, is somebody else. So the provision says that a person who has committed an offense is liable for penalty. Okay, yes. The person who has helped him, who has aided or abetted, is also liable to a penalty. It says any person who aids or abates any of the first mentioned 21 offenses. That means an offense can be committed by an employee of a company, a director of a company. Company is exposed to penalty. Even the person who is controlling that will also be covered with the penalty provisions. Or if he is acquiring possession or concerns himself with transporting of any goods that are liable for confiscation, if you know that this good is liable for confiscation and still you are involved in it, or for any services, then you are liable to penalty. If you fail to appear before, if you have been issued a summon and if you don't appear before the officer, you are exposed to a penalty. And if you fail to issue in a voice in accordance with the provisions of the act, you are exposed to penalty. The amount of penalty is extended up to 25,000 rupees. It is not a fixed amount. It can be 1 rupee, 10 rupee, 100 rupee, maximum 25,000 rupee under CGST, maximum 25 under SGST. Thereby maximum 50,000 penalty can be imposed on any person who helps or who is informed about the goods that are liable to be confiscated and he still helps to transport, handle or remove those goods, or he is concerned with supply of such services, then you are liable to a penalty as a third person, maximum 50,000 rupees. Now take a situation where I am a mastermind of a transaction of a series of bogus bills through A, B, C, D and E. Let's say I am the mastermind. I am nowhere involved in all the companies A, B, C, D, E, and whenever one transaction, one person, one invoice in that bogus chain is caught by the officer, the entire chain is then revealed. And let's say all the persons in that A, B, C, D, E are, let's say, either not traceable, or even if they are traceable, it is very obvious that they are not the ultimate beneficiaries. They are just the pawn which have been used. And let's say I am the ultimate beneficiary. So the government or the officer will first have to establish that I am the person who has helped committing that offense. Yes, let's say he has established. Now what is the offense? What is the penalty? A maximum of 50,000 rupees that can be imposed on me. Government realized that this penalty, this issue of fake billing is quite common, and because of it, the actual mastermind or the intermediaries who are not involved as by their name legally are getting an escape route with a mere 50,000 rupees. They have introduced another provision which is 122 bracket 1A. After 122(1), they have inserted 122(1A). This has been amended with the recent 2020 Finance Act, effective from 1st April. What does this law says? Any person who retains the benefit of a transaction, any person who does not passes, but he retains the benefit of a transaction. Now, what type of transaction it says? It says transaction specified. Let me take you back to that. Transactions specified in clause 1, that is supply of goods without issue of invoice. 2, issuing of invoice without supply of goods. 7, which is taking ITC without receiving goods. And 9, that is taking ITC in violation of input service distributor provisions. If a person is found to retain the benefit of this bogus billing, cash sales issues, and he's taking the credit, then it will be deemed that he is a person who has also committed that offense, and he would also be liable to the penalty as a normal person. So this provision has been introduced just to catch hold of the persons who are the masterminds. Earlier there were no provisions to demand penalty from them, but now yes, they have a provision in this regard. Now let me share with you certain points over here as to how can a person as a businessman stay away from procuring goods from a person who is issuing a fake bill. Because let's say I am a genuine businessman, but I do not know from whom my vendor has purchased. We cannot do that level of due diligence. We can at max go to our vendors, but we cannot go to their vendors, the vendors of our vendors. Let me first give you certain examples. Mr. A is into manufacturing of a product. His business is such that the raw materials for his business is sold by, let's say it's scrap. It is sold by the sellers, not by sample sales or anything. They come to the office of the Mr. A, show them the product, that this is the product, please purchase from us. My client, let's say Mr. A, he's saying, though I have 10 other options, why will I go to you? I have so many vendors who can furnish me, you give me a better rate. He said, okay, fine, I'll give you a better rate. So now this person, Mr. A, is purchasing from a person who has come to his factory premises, shown the sample, got the goods approved, taken the purchase order. After 7 days, let's say, he comes with 2 trucks to deliver that goods. When he comes with those 2 trucks to deliver that goods, Mr. A, the manufacturer, would first match the quality. If found okay, he will accept the goods, take the invoice as given by the seller, take the banking details, and with the normal payment terms, immediate 30 days, whatever is that terms between them, he will make the payment to the person. Now, as a part of vendor due diligence, who is my vendor? That person who came to my factory. Do I know him beforehand? No, I do not know him. In a business, do I need to know all my vendors personally? Practically not possible. I am concerned with the goods, not with the person. That is the general business practice. Yes, basic level due diligence I have to do. I will not purchase from a mafia. That all basic things we need to work on. Now that person came to me, and he can be a salesman for that company. He need not be the owner. He has given me the GST details of one Mr. Z, given the bank details of Mr. Z, given the invoice of Mr. Z, everything is there. Now he told me, you have got your goods, please pay me. I have paid that person, Mr. Z, the required amount. Now one fine day the officer will come and tell me that Z had purchased from someone who is a fake bill seller. You understand what is the situation? What is happening to your company? Now your company, the person who has sold a fake bill will have that Z in his books of accounts as a buyer. Yes, it will be there. Now when Z's book will be investigated, it will be found out that he has sold to you. So if Z has itself received a fake bill, can he actually sell goods to you? No. So it will be presumed that Z has sold fake bill to your client? Yes, it will happen. Now, for no good reason, it has been alleged that you have merely received an invoice and not the goods. This will be alleged, right? Now what? How can you prove otherwise? The onus to prove will be on the assessee in this case, because the facts in a case of a chain will be preconceived that yes, if he has himself not received a uh, goods, he has himself received only invoice, how can he sell goods to you? Now, what can be your defense points? First, keep a strong system of e-way bills based on your uh, each entry of vehicle in your premises. In case the vehicle needs to cross any toll nearest to your premises, please insist and keep a copy of that toll receipt, which will be there with the driver of the vehicle when he arrives at your premises. I'll tell you why. We faced the case with one of our clients, same example. He said they are very renowned client of Hyderabad. They are the persons who would not commit an offense, but for some reason they had purchased from one Mr. Z, who gave them the goods and the invoice of a person who was subsequently found to be non-existent. Now what are happening, the department has alleged hello, am I audible now?
Yes, Gagan, you're audible. Gagan?
Yes, thank you. Okay,
Gagan, we lost
so
you,
now the
for some
allegation
time.
that is okay. Now the allegation on the client is that you have received only the invoices to take the ITC benefit. You have not actually received the goods. Now the assessee was trying to explain, see, I have made payment to that person in proper banking channel. There is proper e-way bill. But we have to understand that these payment through banking channel and e-way bill, unless verified in the route, it is not an evidence that the goods have actually been moved. It is not an evidence. You can actually create a e-way bill which will never be intercepted in the road because there is no actual movement of goods. So having a mere e-way bill is not sufficient to establish that you have received the goods. So now what we did for that client was that we took out all the toll receipts of each of the vehicle nearest to the date, that let's say on this particular date this truck number had crossed this toll plaza. So it cannot be a coincidence that for all my purchases that you have alleged, the trucks were there at this toll plaza. That gave us a edge, because the officer was not ready to listen in any of these cases. No, in what do you say, bank, no e-way bill, nothing was being accepted, no GRN register was being accepted, nothing. Next, what we also checked as a best business practice, how to avoid certain things. One is toll receipts, you can keep it matching with your each e-way bills. The second is, in case you have a CCTV camera or any system of recording, that can be kept as a useful tool to actually establish the movement of goods in your premises. Now there is a problem that if the transaction is happening, let's say today, and the assessment, let's say if it happens after 6 months or 1 year, generally a person does not keep the video footage for such a long time because it needs huge data space. So what we have thereafter inducted for that SSE is that for each movement of vehicle in and out of the factory, there will be an automatic image taken by the system, like it happens in case of tolls or the speeding camera. So an image will be taken and kept as a record. Now images take considerably lesser space, and this can be a very useful tool. See, vendor verification is always there, but there will be certain restrictions to do that vendor verification. Now I'll give you one more example of allegation of offense and how to defend for it. Uh, let's say the officer has alleged that you have purchased goods from Mr. A. Now Mr. A, you have shown it in your 3B, it is coming in your 2A, everything is there, you have made payment through banks, everything. However, the place of business of Mr. A, which is being given in the portal of Mr. A, is non-existent. There is no office of Mr. A on that address. Hence, we have a reason to believe that he is a fake person, and you have received goods of a fake person. This is the allegation, and a lot of actions have been taken on this allegation. What can be your possible defense? Very simple. This thing will come. See, as I told, it's an art. It will come from your heart first. That checking the physical address of vendors, is it my job or the government's job? So we have to look at the registration provisions, which has a provision of physical visit of the officers to the premises of the registered persons to check and be confirmed, yes, this person is there at this premises. This provision is there, this power is there with the tax officer. How am I supposed to do that? Am I required to do that? No. Am I supposed to do that? No. Who is supposed to do it? The officers. They have not done their part. How can I be made liable for that? Point one. Point two, again, if it is an offense, first the allegation has to be proved that I have purchased goods without, I have received bill without actual movement of goods. So the first onus would be on the officer to prove. Second, you have to defend your case, which will be through the strategies that we have discussed. Okay. So I will also discuss 122.3 we have discussed, 123, 122, 1A we have discussed. Now we will also discuss, just let me see this. What is the residual penalty clause? Under section 125, it says if there is no specific penalty for any offense, if it is not mentioned in the ensuing sections of 122 or 129 or 130, then you can levy a general, the officer can levy a general penalty of maximum 25,000 rupees. Please note, this 25,000 is not an absolute figure. It says maximum, for an amount maximum 25,000 rupees. So he can impose a general penalty, residual penalty of 5,000 as well, which may be extended up to 25,000 rupees. 2 points quickly I will recollect. We remembered with the section 126 that we had discussed at the first, which is the savings clause from penalty, which talks about where you can take a defense, minor breach of procedural lapse. If you look at subsection 6 of that provision, it says this minor breach wala saving, this saving for this minor breach will not be available to you in case the penalty is a fixed amount or a fixed percentage. Oh my god, that means 122 bracket 1 is totally out, because 122 bracket 1 is 10,000 or 10%. So it's a fixed amount or fixed percentage penalty. So the savings clause, which gives us a protection for minor breaches, will not be applicable for any penalty committed under 122 bracket 1. Let us take two examples over here. One very simple, very common example. Let's say the officer alleges that you are supposed to affix your GST number on the signboard outside your gate. However, you have not done that. Whether this offense, this non-action, is covered under 122 bracket 1, those 21 clauses, the answer is no. Is it there in 122.2? No. 122.3 aids or abates? No. If it is not there in 21 clauses, it will not be over there. No, it is not there. Then What is the clause? Section 125. So 125 tells that this is a penalty, this is an offense for which no penalty is prescribed. So a generic penalty, maximum 25,000 CGST, 25,000 SGST can be levied. Since this offense has a penalty which is not fixed, therefore 126 relief can be claimed over here. And you can say that this is a procedural lapse which is easily rectifiable, and you can take that plea. On the other hand, we will again discuss, what if Gagan ITC has been taken not in 2A? That means it is not getting fulfilled in 122.1. Go to 122.2. Okay. Gagan, what happens if, let's say I have taken an ITC, but there are certain, I have received the goods, I have taken the ITC, it is there in my 2A, but let's say there is a minor amount difference, 1523 I had to take, I have taken 1532, or some small mistakes which is very apparent from record. Again, there is no provision for it. 125 gives you a variable penalty, maximum 25,000. Therefore, you can go and take relief of 126. Now, let us try to link section 122.1 and 122.2. 122.1 has 21 areas and the penalty is 10,000 or 10%. Okay. 122.2 talks about those fraud and not fraud cases with penalty as 10% or 100%. Okay, for fraud cases 100% penalty, non-fraud cases 10% penalty. I understand. Now Gagan, if things were same, for example 122.2 talks about where tax has not been paid. So this will cover all those cases, tax collected but not paid, tax not charged, tax wrongly collected. So all those provisions are getting over there. ITC wrongly availed, again it is coming over there. So all these provisions are already there in 122.1. So why 122.2 is required for this? So we need to understand first that linking 122.1 with 73 or 74. 73 is non-fraud cases, 74 is all fraud cases. 122.1, if you would look at the items, you would see all the offenses mentioned in those 21 points towards 74 as their collection section of penalty. That means somewhere or the other the fraud element is involved. However, if there is a non-payment of tax not because of reason of fraud, then 122, see, because we remember 122 is the levy section, it will be levied through 122 and then from 73 and 74 it will be collected. So we have seen this. Why is the 73 and 122.1 and 122.2 is there? Now we need to understand the difference between the different stages of penalty. Give me 5 minutes to explain this. We are moving towards, we're just touching 73 and 74. 74, let us talk about it first. 122 talks about fraud cases, penalty is 100%. But if you look at 74, it says that if you pay us in different stages of assessment, we will take different level of penalty from you. The earlier you pay, the earlier you admit your mistake, the lesser amount of penalty I will collect. So it says if you pay, if you have a fraud case and if you pay before service of notice, you have to only pay 15%. Please take note of it and we will look at the anomaly over here. It says if before service of show cause, if you pay voluntarily or upon instance of an inquiry, if you pay, you have to pay 15% penalty. And if after issuance of show cause within 30 days you pay, then that means if show cause is issued, then 25% penalty you have to pay. And let's say you still want to adjudicate on that matter, you have still not accepted and you have proceeded with the order, and now there is an order. of demand. It says still if you pay within 30 days of the order, you only have to pay 50% penalty. After the 31st day, the penalty amount is 100%. It is not more than 100, limited to 100. So earlier you accept, lesser amount of penalty you have to pay. Now the anomaly, first provision says before service of notice, 15% penalty. Service of notice is when I receive the notice. So when I receive the notice, if I pay before that, it is 15%. But it also says if within 30 days of issue of notice you pay, then it is 25%. For example, notice inquiry was conducted on me, I understood, yes, there will be a tax liability. Notice issued on, let's say, 10th of April. I paid the tax amount, interest amount and penalty on 11th of April, and the notice was received by me physically on 13th of April. Okay, 10th April show cause issued by the officer, which was received by me on 13th of April. But in the meantime, I have already paid. I know because I have admitted that liability. I know he will be issuing a show cause. I have paid on 11th. Now, when is the service of notice happening? It is on 13th of April. And when is the issuance of notice? 10th of April. So if you would see, I am following in both the provisions that before service of notice is 15%. Yes, I have paid taxes before service of notice. However, I have also paid within 30 days of issuance of notice. So it will ask for a 25% penalty. So this anomaly between this point needs to be checked, and any mischief in penal provisions, if it is there in the interpretation of law, the one which is more beneficial to the assessee, we generally call it the Hayden's rule, the one which is more beneficial to the assessee would be followed. One more mischief which is there in penalty provisions, if you would look at section 73, it talks about cases where you have non-fraud intentions. Now we know if there is no fraud case, we have two benefits. One, only 3 years can be adjudicated at once, no extended period applicable. Second, the penalty is applicable only after the order and not at any stage before the order. Fine, it is there in 73. Okay. However, section 73 bracket 11, if you would read section 73 bracket 11, it talks about, just give me 1 minute. Yes, it says notwithstanding anything contained in subclause 6 or subclause 8, penalty of 10% shall be payable where any amount of self-assessed tax has not been paid within a period of 30 days from the due date of payment. That means in the penal 73 section non-fraud case also, it says notwithstanding anything contained above, if you have some self-assessed tax which you have paid after 30 days of the due date, still you have to pay a penalty of 10%. That means, let's say if you have filed your 3B after 30 days, that is a self-assessed tax which you have paid after the due date, after the 30 days of due date. Yes, Gagan, subsection 11 is getting attracted because initially they say that if you pay before issuance of show cause notice, you don't have to pay any penalty. Now it is saying that if you pay after 30 days of the due date, which is your 3B date, you still have to pay a 10% penalty. So this anomaly has to be carefully scrutinized, because what I see, we will discuss the mitigation strategy for this, but that will be a very mature discussion that we will be having. Probably all the officers will not have that level of maturity while imposing this penalty. So we have to be very careful on how to if we talk about mitigation strategy, the best is don't delay your 3Bs. Even if you delay, don't delay it beyond 30 days. That is the best strategy to avoid. However, if that is not followed, we need to understand that you cannot give me benefit in one section and immediately take that benefit in another section without altering any conditions. Now, what maximum we can assume over here, which it talks about self-assessed liability. Let's take an example. GSTR 9 has been filed. A tax has been additionally admitted over there. It is reported in table 9 of GSTR 9, supposed to be paid by the assessee by DRC 03. However, the assessee has not paid that amount on its own. Now, an inquiry has been initiated for that year. The moment the assessee got that inquiry notice, he remembered that, okay, I had an amount which was yet to be paid. Let me pay that first and then move towards the assessment. So for example, for 17-18, there was an additional tax that I admitted in my annual return, but it was not paid. Now, if that notice comes, I first pay a notice, even if it is not a notice, it is just an inquiry letter. And now if I first pay that amount and then go for inquiry, the officer is well within the provisions of this act to initiate a penalty of 10%, saying that this is a self-assessed tax not paid by you voluntarily. We questioned you through inquiry, only then you paid it, hence you are also liable for the 10% penalty. That can be one point that I can restrict this subsection 11 and not extend it to all the general 3Bs, if you would say. Okay, now we will quickly discuss certain possible defenses which we can take while replying to penalty letters. I will again reiterate, penalty and offenses is an art and not a science having certain thumb rules. The first that you need to, you can probably defend is that you had no malified intention, or you had no intention to suppress the facts. This can be mitigated by way of disclosing all the information in your returns and not just the information pertaining to taxable amounts. Many a times people have this misconception that this amount is not altering my tax liability, let me not give it. Let's not do that. Let's follow a routine that whatever information is called for in a return, let me furnish it properly. If you have not suppressed any facts, if you have not hidden any information, if you had no mens rea, malified intention, guilty mind, that is the first defense you can take against penalty, and you can request, rather defend, you can plea that this penalty, if imposed under section 74, should not be under 74, and please move it to 73, thereby reducing the penalty to either 0% or a substantially reduced percentage. You can also probably look at this angle about frequent changes in the law. There are a lot of items. For example, DORB, now it is probably more stable, the rate of taxes and all. Initially, the rate of DORB was changing every 2-3 months when GST was started. So a lot of times what was happening, that the person generally in the suburbs, they started their business, they are charging tax, suddenly the notification comes, it says this item is exempted, but they have still continued charging the tax. No issues over here. But when it goes other way around, when it is already exempted and suddenly it is brought to tax, they have still continued to treat it as exempt. So you probably need to, and they have not collected the tax as well. So these are the possible defenses, but I would not say these are the ultimate defenses. This will be accepted in the court of law. It may or may not be, totally depending on the facts. I would still reiterate and say that ignorance of law is not a defense, but you have to take certain defenses so that the officer or the lordship has an hearing ear towards your plea. Next, what defense probably you can take is, let's say, about the industry practice. We will take the example of classification. This is the classic example, because a lot of times in case of classification, the classification is driven by the industry practice. So you have to take a plea that this is the industry practice, because of which this is the decision I have taken for my action, and hence it should not be treated separately from the industry. This, I will give you one example. If we, let's say, in case of tours and travel agents, there are a lot of travel agents, because the tax rate is 5% on the transaction value. Let's say 5 lakh is the package of a tour, 5% is the GST, 25,000 on it. A lot of travel agents have retermed themselves as travel consigners, and they are more of a travel consultants than travel agents. They have moved into the pure agent mode and charging a percentage of the package which they are booking for the persons. Let's say 10,000 is the charge amount which they have actually earned, and they are merely paying 1,800 GST on it. So again, you have to look at the industry practice, which is widely followed by everyone. Revenue neutrality can also be a point wherein you could defend that because of this action there is no loss to the exchequer, and hence there is no revenue loss, and therefore penalty with respect to the taxes should not be levied. A general non-compliance, a procedural lapse is there, which may be looked with lenient eyes in terms of section 126. Again, what we discussed, you have to work on the major part is that you have to work on the intention, the malafide intent, which will help you restrict the tax liability, the period of tax liability, that is 5 years or 3 years. That means jumping from 74 back to 73, section 73, and it will also help you reduce your penal exposure to a large extent. Now, to prove, the allegation will be there that you have, yes, because of all these reasons you have a guilty mind, you have an intent to evade tax. Now you have to prove that why you are saying that it is not a guilty mind, it is not an intent, it is not a fraud to evade tax, is on the SSEs. Your books, your disclosures, your returns, your timely submissions to the officers should be such in such details, and it should be, your books should be maintained in such complete details that you can always say that I have given you all the information. Where is the question of hiding any facts in it? Yes. Okay. Newer and complex laws which is difficult to understand for common citizens. If I would give an example of Rule 43, I would say sometimes even I have to bang my head to properly implement Rule 43, because first I have to take the entire credit for that capital goods, and then over a period of 60 months I have to keep uh, reversing an amount with interest. What if I reverse the entire for the entire 60 months in advance, and at the end of 5 years I will see what is the short or excess amount? And if that can be done, I do not know, probably, because let's say if I have 10 assets to manage at different points of time and certain assets are sold in between, Rule 43 will actually give nightmares even to the tax officers to understand. Now one more which is very helpful yet very seldomly used, which is conflicting judgments. You have to first understand that whatever is written in the GST Act, you have to first acknowledge that this may be correct, this may be wrong. Gagan, what are you saying? Something mentioned in the act, it can be wrong. Yes, it can be wrong with respect to the constitution. It can be ultra vires the powers of the constitution. It may happen. You have to first acknowledge, find out various case laws. You have to see the interpretations of the courts, the Supreme Court or the High Courts, take a clue from there, match it with your facts, or differentiate with your facts. Any against case law which is there, you differentiate with your own case law and say that that case is different, my case is different, that ratio cannot be applied in my case, and because of that I have a strong case. For very simple example, this Safari Retreat case of Odisha High Court for capital goods credit, that is a welcoming step as of now. You can take leads from there. There are a lot of cases. However, with respect to advance ruling, we know that it is not mandatory on the officers to impose for other clients, for other SSEs rather, but we can take leads from advance ruling. We can take the mentality of uh, the jurisdiction, the jurisprudence of the officers of the department of the revenue, in deciding any advance ruling which is probably in our favor, in the favor of the assessee. However, I have seen 90% of the advance rulings pro revenue, but let's say if there is a advance ruling which is favorable to the assessee, you will need to take leads from there. See, these are the few areas of possible defense that we have discussed. There are n number of other defense areas which you need to create. The bottom line would be, you need to know what actions you should not do, that means offenses which you should not commit, as well as you should also be aware of the actions that you are required to do in time. Inaction of those would also lead to be an offense. We will again quickly discuss 129 in another 2 to 3 minutes, and then we will close. What is penalty under section 129? It says when any goods, this section 129 deals with detention, seizure and release of goods. What is this? If any goods are transported in a conveyance, let's say a truck, which is in contravention to the provisions of the act, it is without an invoice, it is without e-way bill, if it is without appropriate invoice, then it can be section 129 can be invoked, and such vehicle and the goods both can be detained. So a goods is moving without an invoice, or let's say it is moving with an invoice but without an e-way bill, without a cover of an e-way bill, a valid e-way bill, that goods as well as the truck, the conveyance, both are liable to confiscation as well as detention, seizure. Now after detention, what will happen? You have to go and ask for release. There are two cases. One where the owner of the goods goes to the officer to seek the release. He will first see the officer. Okay, you are the owner. Okay, now whether your goods is a taxable one or an exempt one. If it is taxable, he will say pay me the tax amount plus 100% penalty. That means, let's say 1 lakh is the good value, 12% is the tax rate, so you have to pay me 12,000 tax and 12,000 penalty, and then you can take your goods. Or let's say if the good is exempted goods, then there will be no tax amount. Then it says you have to pay me 25,000 rupees or 2% of the value of goods, whichever is less. In our example, 2% of 1 lakh value of goods is 2,000. So I have to merely pay 2,000 even for my exempted goods to get it released. This is the example when the owner is traceable and he goes to collect the tax. In case where the owner is not available to get the goods released, then what is the penalty? Tax you have to pay for taxable goods, you have to pay plus 50% of the value of goods reduced by the tax amount will be as penalty. In the earlier example, 100% of the tax amount is the penalty. In this case, where owner is not going to claim that goods, 50% of the value of goods is claimed as penalty. And in case of exempted, again the amount is 25,000 or 5% of the value of goods, whichever is lesser. That means where the person is not going to claim himself, in that case the penalty amount is more. This is the provision for detention, seizure. You can pay this amount, or you can furnish a bond for this amount and get your goods released, and then you will be having certain time period within which you have to pay this amount and get your goods released. Otherwise it will be liable for confiscation and then subsequent sale by the officers. We will now take questions as Shilpi ji would deem fit, and we would take it.
Thank you, Gagan. Now we'll just take up the questions that have come up. The first question is whether there will be a penalty for a party. I claimed ITC on an invoice and 2A was reflecting, but later changed due to amendment by the vendor. That is, the person had claimed credit on an invoice which was actually reflecting on 2A, but it got later changed due to amendment made by the vendor. So whether this person who has claimed the credit recipient, whether he will be liable to any penalty because this is not presently appearing in 2A. Now it is not getting
reflected in 2A.
Because of an amendment.
Yes, that is it. Because after the amendment, it is not getting reflected in 2A. Now, first, assess what period are you talking about? Is it after the requirement of 36.4 or before the requirement of 36.4? If the matter is before the requirement of 36.4, that means matching of 2A as per the rule, we need to understand that none of the penal provisions were attracted. See, 122.1 is not attracted. 122, which talks about claiming wrong availment of ITC apart from the act and rules, there prior to 36.4, that is October 2019, this rule was not there. So there is no penal provision prior to that date. However, post that period, what does it say? That it has to be reflected in 2A. You have a proof that it was reflected in 2A. Now it is subsequently amended by the person. First, assess why is that amendment? Is it your mistake or his mistake? If it is his mistake, then I would say, see, again, penalty is not a thumb rule that it is now not matching, it is not getting reflected, you have to pay the penalty. You have to establish that I have taken the credit validly, he has disclosed it properly. Now he has changed his mind, because of which he has somewhere made that amendment without informing me. Why should I be made liable for that penalty?
Yeah. Okay, we'll move to the next question. If my HSN from purchases is different from sales, then what is the consequences?
Okay,
So,
so we are
this I
dealing with
think
the
he's talking
case where
from.
Sorry.
I think he's
Hello?
talking from the trader's perspective. Yes, Gagan,
Yes,
can
I
you hear me?
understand that. Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
This is a case, let's say this person is Rahul Gandhi, sorry to use that name, where he's purchasing aloo and selling sona. See, we have to understand that this can happen in two scenarios, where actually you are purchasing a completely different product and selling a completely different product. That is one case. Second, I'll give you a live example of my own father's business, wherein the product that he purchases from his vendor, who is a manufacturer, charges it at 5%, having a different HSN, but I know that that item is having a different HSN of 12%. The trader, the manufacturer, is somehow charging 5% for his own benefits. My suggestion to my father would be, if you know that the product that you are dealing is having HSN of 12%, you sell at 12%, even though you are purchasing at 5%. However, there has to be a reasonable link between these two HSN. But the other way around, if it is that you are purchasing at 12% and selling at 5%, it would be a big challenge for you. Or let's say the rate of tax is same, however the HSN is changing, there will be a big challenge, and you need to properly document what is the reason of this change and why, even after your repeated attempts, the vendor has not clarified it.
Okay. We'll move on to the next question.
I hope I'm clear.
It's yeah. The next question is, if I have filed the return for February 2020, that is 3B, by 30th June, would it attract penalty under section 122 subsection 1 clause 3? So clause 3
Whether
reads
the
as
return for
collects.
February is filed by 30th June would attract penalty. Okay, so clause 3, what is clause 3? It says collect but
Clause
fails
3
to
reads
pay.
that
Collects but fails to pay. Perfect.
collects
So
any
your
amount
question
as
is,
tax.
yes. So
I
again,
just read out that. I'll just read out that
right.
clause, Gagan.
I
Collects
remember
any
Shilpi. I
amount.
remember Shilpi.
No, I mean just
Okay.
for the
For
benefit
the
of
members,
everyone
yes.
who's hearing.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
please.
it says where a taxable person who collects any amount as tax but fails to pay the same to the government beyond a period of 3 months from the date on which such payment becomes due. Yes, Gagan, you can proceed.
Perfect. So we thank you, Shilpi, that you read this provision, because the answer is very clearly mentioned in the provision itself. It says you have to pay within 3 months from the due date of the payment. So for the month of February, what was the due date? 20th March. Now that 20th March due date was automatically extended till 30th of June. So isn't it very clear that any amount collected as tax can be paid within 3 months from 30th of June? I hope your answer is cleared. If you file your 3B by 30th June, or for that matter, even in the month of July, 122(1) clause 3 will not be attracted.
Yeah. So the next question is whether a car dealer providing repair services to a car owner individual but invoiced to a company be liable for penalty. That is, he's providing service to an individual. He knows it is individual's car, but at the request of the car owner, he is asked to invoice on the company. So he's asking whether the service provider would be liable for any.
Okay, so let us analyze this question from this point. Two aspects we will look into it. One, let's say if I am a watch repairing person, a person comes to me with his watch. How do I know whose watch is it? Is it a watch which he has acquired by way of theft, or is it his own, or is it his brother? First point. Second point, coming to the provisions of GST, it says who is a receiver of goods and services. It says the person who is liable to make me the payment is the person who is the receiver of the services or the goods. Now, in case the receiver, the person liable to make my payment as a car repair, car dealer, if that person is the company, then I will invoice it to the company. But if the company has no liability to pay me, the liability is only of that person, then the receiver is individual. I will issue the invoice in the name of individual. But if I'm issuing invoice in the name of company and the person liable to make the payment is the company, I can very well issue the invoice in the name of the company, because ultimately I need the person to make me the payment. Now the question of his eligibility of tax or not is a different question in the hands of the recipient. But as a person issuing the invoice, I need to only see who is my receiver and whether I have invoiced to my receiver or to a third person. A receiver of a service is not the person who is receiving the services, but actually is the person who is liable to make me the payment.
Okay. So we will move on to the next question. It says where a person inverts the goods without e-waybill, can the recipient be liable for penalty under section 122 subsection 1 clause 18? So I'll just read that clause 18. So he says, where I am getting some goods but there's no e-waybill issued, would I as a recipient be liable for any penalty? So that clause 18 reads as any taxable, it says where a taxable person who supplies, transports or stores any goods which he has reasons to believe are liable to confiscation under this act.
Perfect. So we need to understand that if I am purchaser of the good and there is no e-waybill, first of all, is it an offense committed by me as a repurchaser, as a receiver? Yes or no? That needs to be identified. Now, when am I as a buyer of goods liable to generate e-waybill? When I am the person who is causing movement of the goods. In case I am the person causing movement of the goods and there is no e-waybill on my purchases, yes, I can be exposed to the penal provisions, but not under clause 18, under clause 14, I would say. However, if I am not the person who's causing movement of goods, the seller is probably the person who is causing movement of goods, and the goods come to me without an e-waybill, penalty cannot be imposed on the receiver. It can be on the seller or the transporter, but not on me.
Okay, Gagan. The next question is amount of penalty under section 123 subsection 3 is per transaction or for the period?
123, probably his question is wrong. 122 subclause 3 would be asking, because there is no subsection 3 for 123.
Yes.
So I would answer this question from the perspective whether the offense committed under 122 bracket 3 is per transaction or is it for a blanket period. I would say you have to understand the per it from the perspective of a per nature of transaction, not per transaction. Let's say you have committed two offense. One, out of those 21 offenses, you have committed three different types of offense. So three different penalties can be imposed on you. But for one offense, if you have issued 10 invoices, he will be issuing only one penalty for you.
Yeah, I'll just move
Thank
on to
you.
the next question. We'll take one more question and then this says that if a trader A sells any product to trader B and the trader has paid the bill amount after 3 months or say 4 months. So trader A is selling to
Okay.
B and B has paid after 3 or 4 months. Now trader A has not shown it in his 3B because he has not received the money. Is penalty applicable on A?
Okay. So
is it
Shilpi
clear?
ji, your voice just what time is this
I'll just repeat
question
it.
received? Just repeat the last line.
Yeah. So he says trader A sells to trader B and the trader B
Right.
is paying only after 3 to 4 months.
Right.
Because of which trader A has not shown it in his 3B.
That means trader A has not shown it as a sales. Trader A has not shown it as a sales in his 3B. Okay.
Yes. Until he received the money. So whether he is liable to penalty.
Okay. So we need to first understand that there is no cash concept in GST. The time at which I have to pay the tax depends on time of supply. If you talk about a trader, it has to be a goods. Now for the goods, you have to issue an invoice at max on the date when you are removing the goods, when you are sending it to the trader B. So if you have sold the goods today until 3 months, just because he has not paid you, you have not shown it as a sales, then it is an offense you are causing, that you have supplied goods without the cover of an invoice and you have not paid that tax. It will amount to interest as well as penalty.
Thank you, Gagan. Just I wanted to add one point on a query which was raised. If I can, there was this question on this February 3B.
Yes.
February 3B, which I will be paying by June 30th. One more point which I would like to add on what you had given was that this says collects any amount of tax, but fails to pay the same to the government beyond a period of 3 months from the date on which payment becomes due. So this, I believe, see, there is actually a penalty clause which is there in 73, which says that self-assessed tax, if you don't pay it by 30 days, you have a penalty.
Right.
Now this says you collect any amount as tax. So this could cover cases where you have collected something, you are not liable to tax, but you had collected, or it was exempt, you had collected, and then you're not choosing to pay. So there's a section 76A or 76, I think, which covers that criteria, where they say any amount you collect as tax, you have to pay it to the exchequer. So maybe it could cover these cases. Otherwise, in the present case, as the due date has been extended only up till 5th May, but
yes, if for SSE is having turnover under 5 crore.
Yeah. So the due date is not extended.
Shilpi ji, just to add to your point, whatever you have said is totally correct. Just that we need to see that there are two provisions with respect to collection of tax, clause 3 and clause 4. Correct. Clause 3 says collects any amount as tax but fails to pay to the government. Clause 4 talks about collects any tax in contravention of the provisions of this act. That means if an item was exempt, still I have collected a tax on it, that would fall under clause 4. collects any tax in contravention of the provision. However, if I have collected a tax but I have not paid to the government, that would still continue to fall between fall in clause 3, no? Whatever you have said, 76,
Yes. So
it
then
is
in
if
this
you have
case,
collected a tax
yes,
which you are not supposed to collect, you have to pay to
yes,
that government, pay that to the government. That is getting covered in clause 4.
yes,
And clause 3 can be extended
yes.
to his transaction
Right.
as well, provided it is paid beyond 3 months. But I would still say 5th of May or 30th or 24th of June, all these due dates, I would again say on this part that the government said that you all are sitting idle in your home in this lockdown. So let me not give you a simple extension of due dates. Let me make it so complex that you spend a lot of time in just realizing what is the due date for all these February, March and May returns. So it can be
So if
25th
it's
of
5th
May or
May,
whatever it is. Yes.
yes. So if it is 5th May, the due date, and then it gets I paid beyond 3 months from there, then
3
I
months.
will be liable for penalty as per 42(3).
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So almost all the relevant questions we have taken up. Certain questions which have not been answered, we will try and put in the answers and host it.
Sure.
And now I would like to thank Gagan for taking up such a detailed presentation on the topic of penalties, where every section and clause has been explained very well to our viewers, and most of the questions have been answered. And thank you very much, Gagan, and thank you everyone for joining this
pleasure,
webinar,
Shilpi ji.
and hope this is added value to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Shilpi ji.